As you see, we have a very diverse group of people here today representing underwriting, claims, analytics, and consulting. Should be a very interesting discussion. There's a very broad cross-section, and I look forward to our discussion. So let's get started. The first question I asked is, a lot of people talk about data analytics today. There's people talk about data as the new oil. And certainly the property and casualty insurance industry is embracing data analytics. The first question I wanted to ask was, how does location intelligence or location analytics fit into this new data equation? And I'll throw that out there. Whoever wants to step into that question first, whoever the brave soul is, go ahead.
I can give it a try.
Sure.
So I would say as the majority of our data in insurance, they have a spatial component. Location intelligence becomes relevant in a number of areas. First and foremost, and that's very close to my heart, it's risk understanding. So think about the perils we're exposed to, whether it's earthquake, it's flooding, or windstorms. The spatial component, the exact location of the locations becomes really key, and the analytics around that location becomes really key in understanding the risks. Secondly, combining the geographic coordinates or the geo-coding with digital mapping makes it enable us to have a more holistic view of our locations insured, and that has a beneficial impact on risk accumulation and understanding of risk accumulation. So quite a few applications.
Great. Anyone like to add on that?
And just to add to the point that, that's definitely a nascent, emergent, and growing space in the broader data analytics story. We did a recent survey at Deloitte, with industry leaders around, the extent they use advanced analytics and models related to geopenetration. And from a personalized perspective, 10% of the players in Canada said they're using it. About 35% say they're really thinking about it and playing around with it. And in commercial insurance, 25% are using it as folks that are starting to implement use of geospatial and data analytics broadly. So it's a small sample, a few advanced players, but as you can see, it's emerging quickly.
Right.
Smaller percentages right now, but we should expect to see that grow.
Right. But the people see that in the industry, it's at sort of a juncture where people are starting to play around with it, experiment with it a bit.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think the thing that's very interesting is that we've got to a juncture where people have actually got the tools to be able to use this, because location for static risks clearly is as old as time. The thing that we've now got is this fantastic, I think of it as the exhaust stream of digital data. And so you've got not only location, but you've got timing, haven't you? And that is a very significant development, and that means you've now got real intelligence. So you've just not got just the data, you can actually take actions around it, and that's what's really important.
Yeah. When I started in the business in 1974, we used to get our inspections done by the Insurance Advisory Organization, and they would send a team to Ottawa or Toronto, a certain area, and they used to now they're pieces of art where they would actually map a building like this, and they would show the construction and all these little codes, all color-coded. And then we actually started using telex. And then someday, somebody brought a fax machine. It's just incredible to see the technology. So the information has always been there. It's how it can be, gathered together and how it can be used. And Jonathan and I were talking about earlier, because I'm a bit older in regards to starting this, is that seeing this as a tool and not driving the decisions, but making sure that it's driven as a tool, that the people with experience who've seen these risks can use it to accommodate, make selections that are appropriate for exposure.
Brings a new, I think, level of data and of information to the fingertips of underwriters in a much quicker and real-time way that I think can improve their decision-making at a much quicker pace than we could in the past.
Are you saying that we were slow? Don't we trying to say?
I'm saying we can do more now.
I think so too.
Fewer. There's more efficiencies gained, obviously, with more technology.
But we had more time for lunch back then.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think it's a spectrum of kind of sophistication. So to Mary's point, it's been around for a while in terms of just the static-based stuff. And now it's a question of how do we jump on using it in a more of a real-time basis or more of a kind of transactional basis. And in the fraud space, clearly location is important, whether it's where where the initial policies were taken out, where the claims have occurred, and the pattern of behavior across time. So I think that, and the stats that you're talking about would suggest that everybody's on this journey, just how quickly they're going to get sophisticated about using the tools and really leveraging the data to its fullest.
It's still quite early in the evolution, and it's really within the last 5 years. So it's still maturing in terms of where it's going. But the early wins that we've seen so far are around the visualization and turning that data into information that's usable. And it's like the difference between looking at a spreadsheet and looking at this visual map of that you instantly you can grasp, what's going on. That's the power that we've seen so far. But I think there's still a lot of future it's going to. But
That's great. I wanted to ask a question about how you define or characterize location intelligence or location analytics. People throw the term around all the time, but if you were talking to someone on the street, how would you define location intelligence? What does it mean to the average person?
To me, it's more than just a dashboarding and visualizing. How do you drive, business or analytical insight from real-time information or location-based information? I think that's in essence the goal we're trying to get at. And how do you get what's driving the value, whether it's from a premiums perspective, what's driving the risk control and concentration aspects, and what's driving the operational efficiency. If you can drive insights in those three areas based on location, that's to me is the definition of location analytics and intelligence.
I mean, good analytics has always been about developing actionable insight. So it's a question of figuring out how to use that location information in a way that drives whatever decision making you're trying to influence, whether it's pricing or fraud or and so I think it's just an emerging set of techniques to do that.
I can definitely echo that, but yeah, surprise. I would say that location intelligence is about using the spatial component, both the location but also the time, to do detailed and sophisticated analysis. So if we take the first aspect, location, today we know where the locations are in terms of geographic coordinates, what we call geo-coding. And the second part, the second aspect, the intelligence, the analytics, is around taking that information, do sophisticated models around it, transform it into insight, and eventually making better decisions.
Doug had touched on a point about the how location was used perhaps in the old days. And certainly location has been used as a component in insurance underwriting for years, for many years, for decades. I wanted to ask a question about perhaps the weaknesses in the past approaches to using location. Several people have remarked that insurance companies relied on broad postal codes or broad parameters, and they may not have been as exact. People talk a little bit about some of the limitations of past approaches and maybe where we're going in the future. So let's talk first about limitations of past approaches.
in the past, using postal codes, because you take the difference in you go downtown Toronto and you can have one building that has 4 or 5 postal codes.
Right.
You go into a rural area and you have a whole town that's one postal code. So getting down to any degree of accuracy around that is a huge challenge. It's a primary tool. Yeah.
Using postal codes or FSA territories, you almost have to treat the entire territory as if it's all the same, because there's no other data to kind of differentiate different points within that FSA. So by being able to get rid of the traditional postal address and replace it with latitude, longitude, elevations, you can now make different decisions based on where you are. It doesn't, you're not, there's no more boundaries of that FSA code. It's all about where are you and then in relations to anything else, and you can make a proper or more precise decision about whatever it is that you're looking at, and you're not sort of bounded by that FSA territory.
It does raise other challenges of how you're bucketing groups of latitude and longitude or segmentation in order to make kind of predictive categorization decisions.
Correct, but there are smoothing techniques today that can help you, can support you in doing that. But I mean, to echo your points, yes, a lot of phenomena, events happen on a more granular level than postcode. So think about the flooding or earthquake. I mean, they don't stop at the postcode boundary, unfortunately. So Yeah. So location intelligence gives us this possibility to examine this on a much more granular and detailed level than before.
One of our specialties is terrorist insurance, and the underwriters that we deal with, they book based on postal code. But it was just interesting, the term when you say postal code. So in our rating formula and our accumulation formula, it says a certain amount of money by postal code. So I called the guy in London and I said, well, what do you mean by postal code? And so I gave him the 6 numbers, and I said, do you mean like K4G, or do you mean K4G9? You know, is it this specific? And as Dale had mentioned, that could be, one building, could be 25 buildings in that particular thing. So it isn't really even, I have a good friend of mine who was at the post office, and I asked him, I said, when I was doing this, I said, well, how is it the post office? Now, I can't say this is the official post office position, but how do they determine like these different postal codes? And he said that started off, his opinion was the start of this, how far a carrier could go till 11:30 or whatever,
Makes sense.
I don't mean by, but no, that's what the postal code was, how much mail could he deliver? And then that's the 49L, and then the next one was 4L, and so it really isn't based on what we would consider to be what we're looking at now.
No, we're getting rid of mail carriers, so that it basically is a redundant mode of measurement.
Yeah,
basically,
exactly.
Right?
That's the point.
Our insurance companies, they're aware of this, but how much of a challenge is it to get a more granular or precise measurement geographically? How big is that challenge? How hard is that to do?
It's a big challenge for several reasons. Firstly, I would say insurance companies has not been, historically they have been quite slow in adopting new technologies, and some companies are suffering by that, having out-of-date systems, out-of-date tools. But I would say that I sense that at top management level, people begin to realize the benefits of these advanced methods, these advanced tools. So we're getting there, but it's a challenge, definitely.
Yeah, so I guess the integration into legacy systems is a challenge that I think we all face, or all insurance carriers face. So as you start to introduce these tools on a national basis for the larger carriers, you have to ensure that there's a good and consistent level of accuracy in the data to be able to implement a process that is nationally that's sort of unified, and it can't be a small pocket here. If it's a set of data that's good for Eastern Canada, but they have no data for Western Canada, well, now you're sort of in this position where you have to start looking for different sets of data, different carriers, or you're not necessarily integrating the same logic. And so to find one good set of data that you can use nationally when you're talking about millions of customers, and to make the kind of big data decisions and analysis we need to do, that's, I think, one of the challenges.
I agree. It's not a tool technology issue. It's a data quality, consistency, and completeness issue. So that you can source that and then start to use it in whatever creative ways. And I think getting the frontline collection to happen, or in ways of acquiring and purchasing and integrating third-party data sets to supplement and get that level of granularity. I think those are the challenges that are being looked at right now.
Any more thoughts on the challenges? We're going to start moving into some more specific areas of
The data
location.
itself tends to remain fragmented, and it's not easily shared, but there's likely 2 layers. One is internal to the company, and then it even gets worse when you start talking external sources, like social media, anything like that.
Right.
And finding that right correlation, what are you going to marry that data together based on? Because you can get totally wrong decisions if you don't relate the data properly. It's yeah.
I wanted to look now at some of the more promising areas of location analytics, location intelligence in the insurance world. So getting down to some of the brass tacks of how it actually helps in areas like underwriting, in areas like claims, in areas like fraud detection. So let's start with underwriting and maybe even underwriting and marketing. I don't want to marry those two together because I know underwriters don't always like to do that. But if you're looking at underwriting specifically, what are some of the key advantages of location intelligence in this area? And if we could get as specific as we can in terms of the practical benefits of location intelligence, what are they?
Well, when we look, as a wholesaler, because we're looking at smaller numbers of transactions, but we look at each risk very specifically. So we look at the COPE, the construction, occupancy, protection, exposure. So having access, cost-effective, reliable data for us would eliminate some of the costs, future costs, because we still want to know what the plumbing like, because we want to underwrite that risk internally. But this will help mitigate some of those costs. It gives us an idea. Most of the risks we deal with are discarded accounts that the RSA may not want, because we deal with the special risks that are distressed coverages, usually rooming houses and things. So location obviously is a key importance. We know already that it's not a prime location, but this does give us an information that helps us identify those ones that we need to focus more attention on, even in that area. So it's an important part, because when we look at some of those issues, we would then take and say, well, this is a risk. Let's say we would say this is a risk that we need to have somebody knock on the door and go in to see, but it would eliminate some of that cost for us to make those selections in advance, So it could be very useful for us on that side.
Right. The determination of concentration of values much easier to do and more dynamic and in real time. So you've got location intelligence on all of your current clients, and now you can quickly see, well, let me look at a 50-foot radius from a specific in focus, or what about 100? What's 300 look like? What else is coming into play? Within that radius, now what are some of the other specific data points I'm interested in? Where are the fire hydrants? Where are the fire halls? Is there a river flowing through this? And now you can bring all this together specifically by having the sort of geo-coded information, as opposed to looking at a fire block or an FSA territory.
Yeah, agree. I can say that. I would say that, in terms of risk understanding, to your point, yes, there are a number of perils where it's absolutely key that we got the precise location. Think about flood risk. Today we know that the flood risk is not only happens on a postcode level, but you need to be much more specific in order to have a precise assessment of the risk. And to your point, yes, having a better view, a holistic view on your risk accumulation, the combination of geo-coding and putting all the data on a map, digital mapping, enables you to have this holistic view of all your risk.
Good point. I think with underwriting, people talk about portfolio analysis, risk aggregation. Can it drive improved profitability? Will it improve your combined ratio? Is it doing that now, and can it do that? Is it actually making a difference in terms of profitability?
It does, but I would say, would it improve your profitability? Yes, but the thing is, everybody's doing it. So I would rather say, if you don't do it, then it will have a driver effect on your profitability.
Right.
It's difficult to probably say with accuracy how much of an impact it has, but if you looked at sort of the Calgary or the Alberta flood events, if you could introduce this kind of improved technology, and then if you could recreate the flood, then you would know whether your model worked or not. Right. And the floods will never happen in the same place and the same magnitude. So it's probably a little bit more difficult, but you could probably see, at least you're probably in a better position to identify blind spots now and take action on those. And then hopefully in future events, you're better protected.
Right.
From a portfolio management perspective, it's really helps to think about are we selling as much of a particular type of product as we should in a particular area? So if you're in an earthquake zone, do we have the right penetration in that market? So, usually people buy earthquake after there's an earthquake, and that's not mutually beneficial in the long term as you think about a particular product or an offer. And so thinking about portfolio management and from a sales and marketing perspective, is there an approach from locational intelligence that can help inform some of those decisions or targeted marketing efforts?
Right. Well, you've seen some insurance companies offering flood products in the market today where this didn't exist 5-10 years ago. Is that because they have a better handle on location, at least in part? If you have that confidence, are you able to offer a product that you're more confident in?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a fair speculation.
I saw a report recently on one of, not Canadian Underwriter, anyway, reported that, I guess, the FEMA numbers. The FEMA, they are reevaluating all that because they're the same thing. They're not really sure that data that they've been using for their flood stuff is accurate. And that's a huge transformation. It's a paradigm shift for them to be putting all that stuff after we had the New Jersey stuff. I mean, so yeah, it's an important consideration if you can get reliable data.
I agree. I mean, whether we will be more profitable or not, I don't know, but it will definitely, this insight and all these this capabilities it gives us will definitely be the benefit of for our customers, because we will have better risk understanding. We can communicate that to our customers, and even in a case of an event, a claim happens, we can be proactive in our dialogue with our customers.
We're going to move on to claims. Is there any other comments on underwriting before we move on to claims? Any other thoughts on underwriting?
I think the other thing we haven't touched on is the role in sort of loss prevention, risk management, because and I would actually be very interested in the extent to which you're seeing some insurance buyers using this sort of data and are then able to buy in a more sophisticated manner. I was thinking particularly about some of the sort of marine and trucking risks, because you've got much greater prevalence the use of RFID. So actually for high value cargoes, you can actually really track precisely where they are.
So the risk management clients could also be using location intelligence to basically say, we've got a good risk here. We understand our risk.
Yeah, we understand exactly where our value is at any point in time, and we can protect the weak spots.
Right. Plus, we don't have to deal with legacy systems, so we have access to the data right away. Sorry, I didn't mean to take a shot at you.
I think you're absolutely right. But I think everybody around this table would say this whole issue around legacy systems is something that is pretty unique to the insurers themselves, and I'd also say some of the bigger intermediaries.
Right.
I think that's a fair comment.
I think it's a fair comment. It's always been an Achilles heel. For the risk management clients, I suppose that they have more access to data depending on how sophisticated they are. This wouldn't really come down to the individual consumer, though. They might not have access to the same kind of location analytics. I mean, they would probably be relying on the insurance companies to rate their property effectively.
Yeah.
So it's more on the
I was thinking more about sort of,
the larger clients.
Yeah, things like pharmaceutical manufacturers. Sure. So, for example, if you're trucking legitimate drugs through Mexico, and I hasten So at one stage, I used to do a lot of work with the captive for one of the really big pharma companies.
Right.
And they had a very significant risk that those were very, very high value cargoes.
Right. In terms of claims, my feeling is that underwriting has got the lion's share of investment in location analytics to date, and that claims is playing a bit of catch up. I would throw that out as a completely unverified observation. But I have a feeling that it's probably been more of an investment on the front end. What can location intelligence do for claims in terms of responding to losses, loss management, loss control, adjuster assignment? And perhaps, Dale, you would be in a good position.
Sure. I think the early wins were around that, what I call the workforce management component.
Right.
So whether it be a catastrophe or not, even just in normal situations, being able to assign the claims, knowing where your claims are coming in. We did some early work a couple of years ago where we took the predictive path of a hurricane and mapped that against policy, and then be able to determine which cities do we need to concentrate the response for adjusters on, that sort of thing. And if you marry that with where are your professional workforce, so now if you know real time based on their geo-positioning where your people are, you get a new claim in, well, I've got this person 2 miles away, I'll assign it to him, that sort of thing. So.
Does it help in terms of large loss events as well, like cat events? Are you mainly talking about cat events, or it could be any type of loss event?
We see it just in normal operation too, but obviously in cat events, it's really critical because you're in that rapid response mode. So you need that information and you need it visually right in front of you all the time.
Right.
So
that's a good point. Do you see this emerging more and more on the claims side in terms of location intelligence? Or I think you mentioned it's early stages still, but do you see this emerging more and more on the claims side?
I think so, yeah. And there's going to be, we're just starting to get into things like predictive analytics around reserving, that sort of thing. So there's
Right.
going to be additional uses
Right.
beyond just where's the claim and what's the severity of the claim. That's what we're seeing now.
Google, are you seeing this more on the claims side as well? As you see some of this?
We actually did a demo for a client in the U.S. And just to echo the story about the hurricane, when you think about the path of the hurricane and predicting what's going to happen, we did a real-time feed, a concept essentially on a hurricane path, and pull up real-time news events and social media feeds on that path and saying what's happening in that state or in that city or in that jurisdiction in real time, what's the news reporting, what's social media tweeting, so you can have the latest and greatest information on the impact, and therefore present the early intervention options or the support, and then kind of mobilize adjusters and inform local authorities and governments and insurance companies around latest information. So that's how that's where location intelligence can be really powerful in terms of bringing that real time feed into play in a major cat event to minimize, because the impact, even a few percentage points shaved off, the loss impact is huge.
Right. And it's not just for hurricanes, it could be for any type of risk, really. Any
kind
type
of,
yeah.
Yeah.
Hail?
Yeah, so there's a really nice hail app, and you're going to laugh at me, but this is in Slovenia. So Slovenia and that whole piece of Southern Europe is very hail exposed,
Right.
and even for, your personal auto insurance, you've got an app in your car, you've got an app on your phone.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm sure people in Alberta would like that.
Well, you heard this idea here. So who's going to take it up
Who would have
first?
thought that
Text message, drive to Lethbridge. Okay, and the Alberta city leaves.
Well, that is basically the concept.
But
Yeah.
so to tie claims and hail and location based together, I mean, one of the stories I've heard in another jurisdiction was the guy that was driving his car. He's looking at the weather forecast and he's driving his car to where the next hailstorm is. Claim the hail damage, take the car to his buddy's auto shop, get it fixed there, and this was happening over and over again. And so until you look at kind of the distances that are being traveled from a certain point for all of these claims, well, there's other triggers that you might want to look at, but there's an example of kind of using the location-based piece to help in the fight against fraud.
Right.
And I think that's a really good example of how this is a win-win, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you can say that this gives us the ability to be more proactive than reactive. So I've come with another example of an event, very special event that was back in Denmark a few years ago, where there was a guy who decided to store fireworks in his basement. He was in the middle of a city, and as you can imagine, this thing happened. It all exploded. And we just implemented geo-coding at that stage, so that was really lucky in the sense that we were able to identify the customers that were affected very, very quickly, being able to identify the customers that were affected at this event, and reach out to them proactively before we have even seen the claim. So lots of different events where it can have an effect.
Right. Yeah. In terms of informing customers
Yeah.
when there's a risk or something emerging in real time. It's very interesting. And Ben, you mentioned fraud. That's a good sort of segue into looking at claims and then looking at, as you like to call it, suspicious activity. Not using the F word necessarily, but using suspicious activity. How can location intelligence help in fraud detection?
I think there's a whole number of ways, whether it starts at the policy and looking where at the address misrepresentation type stuff that goes on, where this is actually the public using the location-based information, knowing that premiums are really high in a certain area, a certain postal code misrepresenting, getting a lower premium, and then the claim comes in, and now you got to decide kind of what's happened. I mean, you're driving to work 4 hours every day from Ottawa, just picking Ottawa. So
normal day.
So it's this type of kind of example on the policy side. On the claim side, I mean, we are looking for anomalous behavior or statistically unusual behavior. So bringing in another dimension like location into that analysis, is there a prevalence of a certain set of circumstances occurring in a particular area. Are people traveling suspiciously long distances to go to a specific clinic rather than the ones that are within a certain proximity? And so doing any kind of analysis like that is hugely beneficial as a supplementary exercise to normal fraud investigative techniques.
Can location and intelligence can help in both auto, property,
Yep.
and I suppose even in potentially with liability with slip and falls, if it's a location somewhere and someone says, well, I wasn't actually at that location, and you can pinpoint the exact location of where things can happen.
And I think it's absolutely, and the part that I would stress is it's not necessarily where the initial incident occurred, but all the subsequent activities in the life cycle of that. So again, looking at where that person went to get referrals and treatments, and where they ended up ultimately, and that kind of location-based type stuff. Again, these are all supplementary and additional pieces of information that have to be investigated, and aren't necessarily indicators, but they can be powerful indicators.
Right.
And do you think this is more prevalent for opportunistic or more organized suspicious activity?
Well, I think the techniques can be used regardless of whether it's opportunistic or organized and premeditated, but the kind of subsequent events would probably be more premeditated and organized.
It's interesting. Yeah, fraud, because you could see that sometimes a location will pop up, whether it could be you mentioned a rehab clinic, it could be a P.O. box address that it keeps coming up, and maybe in the past insurers wouldn't have been able to connect a dot, but now that they have some more of that data, they can do that. Very interesting. What about some of the challenges in getting this actually operated? We mentioned legacy systems, but to actually get it into the hands of frontline decision makers, what are the biggest impediments or obstacles that are out there? What's standing in the way of this moving forward? Is it just legacy systems?
It starts with the data capture. So where are you getting the data? It's how it's moving through your system, which is the legacy issue. But it's all sorts of policy and procedure decisions around what are the new rules for using that data to make decisions. So you get an insight that suggests something.
Right.
Has the organization embraced that, embedded that, to train individuals to use that in a consistent way across the organization? So on a case-by-case basis, it's useful. So on an individual claim, you can have more or less sophisticated investigators using that insight in different ways. But I think if you're looking at really impacting an organization, you have to embed that throughout the organization. So it's a design issue.
Anyone else want to?
If you move it back one step too, I think we still got some big brother issues and data privacy issues to deal with that haven't been solved yet. So I think there's some barriers there for sure.
On the fraud side, hopefully the S4 bill that just passed is going to help everybody do more.
Yeah, but talking about Big Brother and fraud, the whole arrival of telematics and telematic devices give us so much data, and we can uncover what happened in the claim situation. We can find out the real story from all these data, and come back to your point about Big Brother. Lots of advantages by doing that, but of course you also have to respond to some of the ethic questions around Big Brother.
For me, I love telematics because it's actually an anti-fraud indicator, because there's no fraudster that's actually going to go and volunteer to sign up for a service that gives me more data about them. So if you got telematics, you're probably not a fraudster.
I'd say that there's also a learning curve in terms of changing the way that you're looking at this new data and how you're going to make decisions going forward. And so I guess if historically you're always looking at, and I come back to sort of FSA codes, but if all of your historical analysis and research and all of your current processes internally are all based on FSA territories, now you introduce this new way of thinking about the information. Well, you almost have to a certain extent, redo all your historical in this new model so that it can make sense and you can make some better decisions. So there's a lot of work and sort of that change management that's required.
You have to redo some of the stuff, but also in different tools, because the tools of yesterday are not capable of handling that amount of data. So you have also to make a huge investment in tools and systems and making them integrate them. So yeah.
It's also the application in terms of commercial versus personal, right? When you have lower volume, fewer instances or transactions that you're dealing with and you're trying to make real-time decisions or location-based decisions, it may be easier for underwriters and adjusters to look at that when you think about high volume and you've got a whole number of policies to look at on a daily basis and adjudicate and underwrite. It just changes the game. How do you make it super easy, simple, intuitive, served up, real time in order to enable that and really scale it?
Right.
That's the challenge at hand, because we're still ways away from thinking about making that happen. And so it goes back to the platform and how well it integrates, but also how do you really make it easy for the users to adopt it in a meaningful way?
But automating as much of it as you can and leaving only the exceptions to be dealt with by individuals. And then so you really have to believe in the model that you're building to allow that sort of straight through processing on this new location-based information.
I was going to say, that really does require leadership from the top and cultural change. So we've been doing really quite a lot of research around innovation in insurers, and around half the insurers that we've been surveying.
You said those in the same sentence.
Well, exactly. I rest my case. Yeah, exactly. Around half the insurers will tell you that their business model is already being disrupted by technology, but are half of them doing anything about it? Well, the answer is, I think, Doug, you've answered that question. And it's the ones who've got the leadership, who've got that sort of test and learn culture.
But I think Dennis made a great point earlier. It's not a question of getting more profitable. It's about stopping erosion by staying up, keeping up with everyone else. And it's going to become an anti-item at some point where you have to be doing it.
Right. What about the future of location analytics? If we put on sort of, or we get out the crystal ball, it's always sort of difficult to speculate. But we talked about underwriting and claims and fraud, but are there potentially other applications that could come with location analytics, location intelligence that will impact the property and casualty insurance industry? What are maybe some areas that are just beginning or emerging today?
Well, you started off and we didn't really address the marketing side, which is
significant.
Product
Think of it in terms of how it can be applied for, especially a national company as to how they want to develop their products and how they want to market the products. So I can see that cost effective for sure.
And of course that brings in distribution, the brokers wanting to find out what areas do brokers represent.
And reducing their commissions. Yeah, I see. I got it. I disclosed it all. I'm sure I did.
Yeah, I think it's about figuring out how to inform and impact the specific individual's interaction and engagement with the organization, and how do you kind of do that in a way that's as effective. So to get back to it, that's local-based pricing or high-value customer targeting, or doing segment of one. It's just how do we become more effective at that specific individual engagement, and that's going to draw. That's in the future. That's going to be where the money's at, because layering on the static location piece with mobile location. So vehicles are moving, goods are moving, services are moving, devices are moving. In the future, how do you get that mobile location analytics built into or integrated with, what's emerging today, in order to say, okay, specifically for Craig, this is what we should do and we should offer, and this is how we'll be profitable in the long term.
Whether you believe it's going in this direction or not, I mean, I'm hearing people talk about the movement towards highly personalized products, so very very micro rather than kind of bulk segmentation or large segment product development. And so I think this is where all sorts of data's got to come in order to price the risk appropriately.
I was recently watching a webinar about high value. One of the companies in the States was looking at focusing their efforts on high value. And the numbers, it was something like the 1% who have everything make up like 22% of the total personalized premium in the States. I mean, if you don't know that, you wouldn't know where to go. So I mean, the information and how, and then of course they then will be able to track where these properties are, what kind of cars they have. It is George Orwell kind of thing, but still, that information is invaluable. If you're going to start a major project, you need to know where to go and how to get that information, develop it.
Do you think insurers can do that micro segmentation? Can they get to that level of one-on-one customer type product development?
the common language here is latitude, longitude. It's GPS location, right? And if you can translate whatever set of data you have into latitude, longitude, then you can have anything talk to each other and you can relate anything. And then I think that opens the door to, just about anything. It's just,
That's the thing when I was looking at this, because this is all fairly new technology for me, is for a company to decide what model they want, like what information do they want, and then to build. I mean, there are obviously third-party providers that provide what they think is important, but for an insurance company to sit and say, well, this is essential, but we would like to have, obviously, the fraud side being part of that, or like if you're doing business with London, you need to get all this collection, the FinTech, and you have to do the sanction stuff. There's lots of information that if you could get it accumulated at one place, could eliminate a lot of time and effort and avoid major problems down the line. So building the model and saying, okay, I can get all this stuff, but as Jonathan says, like that's all geographic, but I would like to build this in, and then like it's going to be probably a bespoke is with the work that you use your own system that's going to design for what you want to do. But we talked about management size and saying, okay, this is, and then going for it. But that probably will change in a year anyway. But still, you have to know what you want before you can collect it. So I think that's a big part of it. And I was going to mention here, we didn't talk, and I didn't know whether this was part of it, but there's a lot of talk about drones, the application of drones in, location, but any information. Is that something that links into this somehow? A use of drones in the claims, or?
I have no comment about drones.
Wait, there's one right there. Oh, no. I don't know if that's part of that. Does that link into this stuff, Jim? Come on. Yeah.
Part of that mobile location analytics,
Yeah.
dynamic location analytics, just marrying the static and the dynamic, and drones are essentially sensors and devices, right? It goes back to everything else that's emerging on the Internet of Things front, right? So how do you integrate that and look at multiple data sources that are useful, valuable in one way, and then how does all of that integrate into a broader data analytics approach in order to create that insights-driven organization? So it's a piece of it, it's emerging, and then how does it all fit and integrate? And that's the big challenge for the next few years.
I would add to drone satellite imagery, especially in U.S. and some other countries that have a bit better coverage than we do. And certainly for remote looking at a claim, it's huge. Yeah.
Can you imagine? Yeah, no, it's.
And marry that with your location information.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, because it wasn't brought up, but I could see that it'd be a fairly useful tool in bringing
You
live,
could send your drone
real-time
out,
stuff.
just program in your location and send your drone out.
Just don't send it by his
Yeah,
house.
exactly. It gets shut down.
Are there any other thoughts about location intelligence? We've pretty much gone through the questions. If there's any other comments or insights about location intelligence, this would be the time to share your nuggets of wisdom, or anything about the future or potential emerging developments on location intelligence front.
I'll speak from the historical point of view as I trace back from the telex to the fax and so on. And all that technology that it's just in technology now, but it was at the time. And when we were talking, Jonathan and I earlier, but it's that from my perspective, being focused on the physical aspect of risk is to make sure that this is a tool, doesn't drive the decision making. Well, it's a tool to the decision, not and when we see that there's so much of this stuff can be, and again, that's the whole part of the integration with this. It's so much easier if people are trained to use this stuff as a tool, but they need to have all that other experience. They need to see the risk. They need to be with brokers. They need to be in the environment and use this as a tool, not have a screen like you see in one of those new futuristic, everybody's a big room, underwriting from a screen.
No, it's a decision support.
Yeah.
Tool. Yeah.
That's the only thing I would see from my perspective is growing into that technology. And I've seen it being used very effectively, but this sounds like a vast amount of stuff that could be misused if it wasn't properly put together. That's all.
I agree. And to add to that, I think this is a general comment. This is just early stages of location intelligence. I wonder how this conversation would be in 5 years' time, because we talked about underwriting, claims, and fraud, and I wonder where are we in a few years. This is just early stages, and with the ever increasing computational power and with ever increasing advance of tools and systems, this will where will it end?
Is there likely to be an insurance industry committee? No. a consortium of the Intacs, the AVUs, the RSAs, the ECHOs that would enter into this discussion? Well, you have that on your side. But in terms of the modeling and what they want, is that, I mean, that, Mary, you're talking about, is that getting people committed? But I don't know, the market's always so diverse and competitive, but that's how I think you could bring this together. If people came together, economy of scale.
It's tricky getting the consortium going in a place where they're trying to compete. So one of the things with Kinetics, why it's been successful, is that we can say that we're collaborating with inside the consortium to get the best possible suspicious lead, and then how insurers deal with that lead and how they investigate, how they adjudicate, when they deny, that's how they compete. And so it's very clean boundary. I think it becomes a little more problematic when you're trying to, and it may even run afoul of the Competition Act, trying to sit down and figure out how to use location-based information to price. Like, I don't know that that would go very far.
Do I get the $20 for the lead in for you?
That was wonderful. Thank you.
Well, slip it over here.
Yeah, not on the camera.
Oh, no, the drone will get us anyways.
So we made a tool for individual companies to use to drive business insight. Very interesting. Well, that wraps up the discussion. I wanted to thank everyone for participating in the roundtable today. It was an excellent discussion. I think we covered all the topics, and I think we learned quite a bit. So thank you very much.